In the summer of 1958, Alfred Hitchcock delivered what many consider his masterpiece, a film so hypnotically perfect that for decades, no one noticed the hidden secret buried within its reels. But deep inside Vertigo's most iconic sequence lies a three-frame edit so subtle, so deliberately concealed, that when you finally see it, everything you thought you knew about the film's greatest mystery changes forever. This is the story of cinema's most perfectly hidden manipulation, and why Hitchcock took this secret to his grave. Alfred Hitchcock was obsessed with perfection, but even more obsessed with deception. By 1958, the master of suspense had spent 4 decades learning to manipulate audiences with surgical precision. Every frame, every cut, every movement was calculated to maximum psychological effect. But with Vertigo, Hitchcock attempted something far more ambitious than mere suspense. He crafted cinema's most elaborate magic trick. Film's production was shrouded in an unusual level of secrecy. Cast and crew members later recalled how Hitchcock would dismiss everyone except his most trusted collaborators during certain scenes. He would clear the set, remembered assistant director Daniel McCauley years later, his voice still carrying the weight of unspoken secrets. Even Jimmy Stewart wasn't allowed to watch certain takes being filmed. What they were witnessing was Hitchcock's most audacious experiment in cinematic manipulation. While audiences were mesmerized by Kim Novak's haunting transformation and James Stewart's desperate obsession, the director was weaving something far more complex into the film's DNA. He understood that the greatest illusions work not because the audience can't see them, but because they choose not to look. The production logs from Paramount Studios reveal an unusual pattern. Certain sequences required an extraordinary number of takes, not because of performance issues, but because Hitchcock was perfecting something that wouldn't be discovered for decades. He was creating cinema's equivalent of a magician's misdirection, hiding his most important trick in plain sight while the world watched, transfixed by the obvious spectacle. Little did anyone realize that within this masterpiece lay a secret so profound it would fundamentally alter how we understand not just Vertigo, but the very nature of cinematic truth itself. The bell tower sequence of San Juan Bautista Mission stands as one of cinema's most vertigo-inducing masterpieces. As Scotty Ferguson pursues Madeline up those seemingly endless stairs, audiences worldwide have gripped their armrests, feeling their own acrophobia awakening. But what we're seeing isn't quite what we think we're seeing. Hitchcock spent months perfecting this sequence, using innovative techniques that would influence filmmakers for generations. The famous dolly zoom, where the camera pulls back while simultaneously zooming in, creates that nauseating sense of spatial distortion that became the film's visual signature. Yet this technical achievement was merely the surface layer of something far more complex. Production designer Henry Bumstead revealed in his private journals that Hitchcock demanded multiple versions of the tower interior. "We built that set 4 different times," Bumstead wrote. Each time, Alfred would make small changes, a different angle here, a modified step there. I didn't understand why until much later. The crew assumed these were typical Hitchcock perfectionist demands, but they were actually serving a far more specific purpose. During filming, Kim Novak noticed something peculiar about the shooting schedule. Certain sequences were filmed multiple times with slightly different setups, even though the performances were identical. Alfred would say, "Cut," and then immediately call for the same scene to be shot again, with what seemed like identical staging, she recalled decades later. But now I wonder if those takes were truly identical at all. The tower sequence consumed weeks of production time and an enormous portion of the film's budget. Studio executives pressured Hitchcock to move faster, but he remained unmoved. He knew he was creating something unprecedented, a sequence where reality itself would become fluid, where multiple versions of truth could coexist within the same moment. Emerged was cinematic magic that worked on multiple levels simultaneously, each more deceptive than the last dot. By 1957, Alfred Hitchcock was at the peak of his powers, but also at his most psychologically complex. The director who had spent decades exploring the darker corners of the human psyche was now facing his own obsessions head-on. Vertigo wasn't just another thriller. It was Hitchcock's most personal confession. Wrapped in the guise of entertainment, the director's relationship with his leading ladies had always been complicated. But with Kim Novak, something deeper and more troubling emerged. Crew members whispered about Hitchcock's intense focus on every detail of Novak's appearance, his insistence on retake after retake until her transformation, from brunette Judy to blonde Madeline, achieved an almost supernatural perfection. James Stewart later admitted that watching Hitchcock direct these scenes was like watching a man possessed. The usually jovial director became intense, almost predatory in his attention to detail. He would spend hours on a single shot of Kim walking up those stairs, Stewart recalled. And then he would do it again and again, each time claiming he needed just one more angle. What Stewart and the crew didn't realize was that Hitchcock was indeed possessed, not by perfectionism, but by a revolutionary idea about the nature of cinema itself. He had become fascinated with the concept of multiple realities existing simultaneously within the same frame. Could he create a film where different truths coexisted, where the audience could watch the same sequence and see entirely different stories, depending on what they brought to the viewing? Personal letters between Hitchcock and his wife Alma reveal his growing obsession with this concept. "I want to make a film where the audience becomes complicit in the deception," he wrote, "where they see exactly what they expect to see, even when something else entirely is happening." This obsession would drive him to unprecedented lengths of manipulation. Both of his cast and his audience. Behind every great magic trick stands a master craftsman who remains forever in the shadows. For Hitchcock's Vertigo deception, that craftsman was film editor George Tomasini, a man whose genius lay in making the impossible seem effortless. Together, they would push the boundaries of what cinema could achieve, creating illusions so sophisticated they remained undetected for over 6 decades. Tomasini was already legendary in Hollywood for his ability to find the perfect cut, the exact frame where one shot should surrender to the next. But with Vertigo, Hitchcock challenged him to do something far more complex, to hide entire sequences within other sequences, to make parallel realities coexist within the same timeline. The editing room became their laboratory of deception. For months, the two men worked in unprecedented secrecy, often laboring through the night while the rest of Paramount Studios slept. Security guards reported seeing lights in the editing suite at all hours, and the sound of film reels running endlessly through the night. George would emerge from those sessions looking like he'd seen ghosts, recalled assistant editor Alma McRory. He'd speak in code with Hitchcock, version A and version B, the surface cut and the shadow cut. None of us understood what they meant, but there was clearly something extraordinary happening in that room. The collaboration pushed both men to their creative limits. Tomasini later admitted that the work was so complex, he sometimes lost track of which version of reality they were constructing. Alfred had this vision of creating a film that would be different for every viewer, depending on what they were looking for. He revealed years later, it was like editing 4 different movies simultaneously. Their secret partnership would produce cinema's most sophisticated hidden narrative, a story within a story, invisible to casual viewing, but unmistakably present once you know where to look. In the digital age, cinema's secrets cannot hide forever. Frame-by-frame analysis has become the new archaeology of film, revealing treasures that their creators never expected audiences to discover. And in 2019, a film restoration expert working on a new 4K transfer of Vertigo made a discovery that would send shockwaves through the cinematic world. Dr. Sarah Chun, a digital restoration specialist at the Academy Film Archive, was conducting routine frame-by-frame analysis when she noticed something peculiar in the tower sequence. 3 frames, lasting exactly 1/8 of a second, contained imagery that didn't match the surrounding footage. At first, I thought it was damage or contamination, she recalled. But the more I examined it, the more deliberate it appeared. What Dr. Chon had discovered was a masterpiece of editorial sleight of hand. Hidden within the climactic tower sequence were 3 frames showing a completely different angle of the same action, an angle that revealed something the main narrative had carefully concealed. The insertion was so brief, so perfectly timed, that it registered subliminally rather than consciously. The technical achievement was staggering. In 1958, without digital tools, Hitchcock and Tomasini had calculated the exact psychological moment when audiences would be most vulnerable to subliminal suggestion. They had identified the precise point in the sequence where viewers' attention would be focused elsewhere, allowing them to slip in their hidden revelation undetected dot when Dr. Chon slowed down the sequence.